Just when Daniel thought he had fixed everything, life gave him another test. And this time it wasn't just about losing money or trust, it was about losing himself. Again, months had passed since Sophia's truth came out. The mansion, once filled with lies, now felt peaceful, warm, real. Margaret was no longer a maid. She sat at the head of the table, smiling softly, watching her son eat. Just like old days, Daniel had changed, completely. He left behind his arrogance, his blind trust, and became something he had forgotten long ago. A son. One evening, he gently held Margaret's hand and said, "Mom, I got a new business deal today." Smiled, "That's good, but don't forget, not every deal is worth your peace." Nodded. This time he listened. Everything seemed perfect. Too perfect, but sometimes, when life becomes silent, it's only preparing for a storm. A few days later, Daniel received a letter. No sender name, no return address, just one line written inside: "You escaped once, but this time you won't." Daniel's hands froze. A strange fear crept into his chest. Who would send this? He brushed it off at first, thinking it was just a prank, but the next day something worse happened. His company accounts started showing massive losses, millions disappearing overnight. Daniel panicked. "This is impossible." He called his team, checked every detail, but nothing made sense. It felt planned. That evening, he sat silently in his room, the same fear, the same confusion. Coming back, walked in quietly. She looked at his face and instantly knew something was wrong. "What happened, Daniel?" she asked softly. Daniel tried to hide it. "Nothing, Mom, just work stress." Margaret stepped closer, placed her hand on his. "Lie to me," her voice calm but firm. That one line broke his wall. Daniel looked at her, his eyes filled with worry. "Mom, something is wrong," and for the first time, instead of handling everything alone, he chose to share. But he had no idea. This problem was not just business, it was connected to his past, a past he thought was over, but was now coming back to destroy everything again. And this time, only one person could save him. Not his money, not his power, but his mother. Daniel sat in silence, his hands tightly gripping the letter. "Mom, look at this." He passed it to Margaret. Margaret adjusted her glasses slowly, her eyes scanning the single line: "You escaped once, but this time you won't." For a moment, her face remained calm, but inside something felt wrong, very wrong. "This is not a joke," she said quietly. Daniel nodded. "And the company losses, they started right after this letter came." Margaret looked at him carefully, her voice steady. "Tell me everything from the beginning." Daniel did. Every detail, every transaction, every strange activity. For the first time, he wasn't acting like a businessman, he was just a worried son. Margaret listened silently, not interrupting once, not reacting emotionally, because sometimes wisdom speaks in silence. First, after a long pause, she asked one question: "Do you trust everyone in your company?" Daniel hesitated, then replied slowly, "I thought I did." Margaret nodded slightly. "That's where your problem begins." Looked at her confused. Margaret continued, "Betrayal doesn't always come from outside. It often sits right beside you quietly." Those words hit differently. This remembered Sophia, the same mistake, the same blind trust. His face turned serious. "You think someone inside my company is doing this?" Margaret didn't answer directly. Instead she said, "Before we blame someone, we need proof." Took a deep breath. "But how?" Margaret's eyes sharpened slightly, a calm intelligence reflecting in them. "We observe." Silently. That one word changed everything. The next few days, Margaret stayed close, not as a maid, not as a victim, but as a guide. She started visiting Daniel's office, not in fancy clothes, but in her simple, calm presence. Employees whispered, "Who is she?" Daniel answered proudly, "She's my mother." And for Margaret, that one sentence was worth all the pain she had ever endured. But she didn't let emotions distract her. She watched everything carefully: the employees, the managers, the accounts. And then she noticed something. One man, always nervous, always avoiding eye contact. His name was Ryan, Daniel's most trusted manager. Margaret observed him quietly. Every time Daniel entered, Ryan looked calm. But when Margaret looked at him, his face changed: fear, guilt. Margaret's instincts became stronger. That evening she said to Daniel, "Keep an eye on Ryan." Frowned. "He's been with me for years." Margaret looked straight into his eyes and said, "So was Sophia." Silence. Daniel's face went pale. That one line was enough, but what they didn't know was something even more dangerous, because Ryan was not working alone, and the real mastermind was someone Daniel never expected, someone from his past. Someone who had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And when that truth comes out, Daniel's world will shake once again. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about one name: Ryan, his most trusted manager, the man who handled his finances for years, the man he never doubted, even once. But now Margaret's words echoed in his mind. So was Sophia. That one sentence was enough to shake his confidence. The next day Daniel walked into the office earlier than usual, his face calm, but his mind alert. Ryan greeted him with a smile. "Good morning, sir." Daniel nodded, mourning. But this time he didn't look at Ryan like before. He observed him every movement, every expression, and slowly he started noticing things he had ignored for years. Ryan avoided eye contact. His hands trembled slightly while holding files. His voice wasn't as confident as suspicion grew stronger later that afternoon. Margaret entered the office quietly, her presence alone. Maid Ryan looked at him once, just once, and that was enough. Ryan immediately looked away. Margaret walked toward Daniel and said softly, "He's hiding something." Took a deep breath. "I need proof," he whispered. Margaret nodded. That night they made a Plan A silent trap. Daniel decided to create a fake transaction. A large amount of money marked secretly, only visible to him. If anyone tried to touch it, they would be exposed the next day. The trap was set hours past. Nothing. Started doubting again. Maybe we're wrong, but Margaret remained calm. "Wait," she said, and then it happened. A sudden alert popped on Daniel's system. The fake amount was being transferred. Daniel's eyes widened. Someone took the bait. He quickly traced the system, the access point, the ID, and then the truth appeared on the. His heart sank. "No," he whispered. Margaret closed her eyes briefly, as if she already knew. Without wasting time, Daniel rushed to Ryan's cabin. He slammed the door open. Ryan froze, his face pale. "What are you doing?" Daniel's voice was cold. Ryan stuttered. "Sir, I can explain." "Explain what?" Daniel's voice echoed loudly. Ryan's hands started shaking uncontrollably. I didn't have a choice." Daniel stepped closer. "Do you mean?" Ryan looked down, his voice breaking. "I was forced." Silence. "By who?" Ryan slowly looked up, fear in his eyes, and then he said a name that made Daniel freeze completely. "Sophia." The room went silent. Daniel's heartbeat stopped for a second. How is that possible? Sophia was already arrested, gone, finished, or so he thought. Ryan's next words sent chills down his spine. "She's not alone, sir. There's someone else behind everything." Daniel's mind went blank. Someone else. Who? Why? What he was about to discover next was not just betrayal, it was revenge, and this time the enemy wasn't just after his money. They were after his life. The room fell into a deadly silence. Ryan's words echoed like a warning. "She's not alone." Daniel stood frozen, his mind racing, his heart pounding louder than ever before. "Who is it?" he asked slowly, his voice low but dangerous. Ryan hesitated, his lips trembled. "If I tell you, they'll kill me." Daniel grabbed his collar instantly. "If you don't, I'll make sure you regret it right now." Ryan broke down, tears in his eyes, fear taking over completely. "I didn't want to do this, I swear," Daniel shouted. "Just tell me the name." Ryan closed his eyes tightly and whispered, "Victor Hale." That name hit Daniel like a thunderbolt. His grip loosened instantly, his face turned pale. "No," he whispered. Margaret, standing behind, noticed everything. "Who is Victor?" she asked calmly. Daniel didn't answer immediately. His past was coming back piece by piece. Finally he spoke. "Years ago, when I started my business, there was a partner, Victor Hale." Margaret listened silently. Daniel continued. "He was brilliant, smart but greedy. We built everything together from nothing. But one day I found out he was stealing money from the company." Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly. "I confronted him," Daniel said. "I removed him from the business." Ryan added nervously. "He lost everything after that, his reputation, his money." Daniel's voice turned heavy. "He swore he would destroy me one day." Silence. Margaret took a deep breath. "So this is revenge," she said softly. Daniel nodded slowly. "And Sophia?" she asked. Ryan replied. "She was just a part of his plan, sent to get close to you." Daniel's heart dropped. Everything was planned from the beginning. The love, the marriage, the betrayal, nothing was real. Margaret looked at her son, his face filled with shock and guilt, but she didn't let him fall again. She stepped forward, placed her hand on his shoulder and said, "Listen to me." Looked at her, lost. "This time you're not alone." Voice was calm but powerful. "We will face this together." The first time Daniel felt something stronger than fear, strength, because this time his mother was by his side, but the danger was far from over. That same night Daniel received another message, a video, unknown number. He opened it and his blood ran cold. It was a live recording, a dark room, a chair, and tied to that chair was someone beaten, weak, barely conscious. Ryan gasped. "That's one of our employees." And then a voice came from the video, cold, familiar. "Hello, Daniel." "Victor Hale." He smiled slowly, looking straight into the camera. "You took everything from me once. Now I'll take everything from you." Daniel's fists clenched. Victor continued. "Your money, your company, and if needed," he paused, his smile turning darker, "your mother." Margaret stood still, calm but alert. Daniel's eyes filled with, "You dare touch her?" But Victor only laughed. "Let's see how far a son goes to save his mother." The video ended. Silence filled the room. This was no longer business, no longer revenge. This was war, and this time the stakes were not money, they were life and death. The video ended, but its impact stayed. Daniel stood still, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Mom," his voice trembled for the first time. "I won't let anything happen to you." Margaret looked at him not with fear, but with calm strength. "Daniel," she said softly, "fear makes you weak, think clearly." That one line brought him back. This wasn't the time to panic, this was the time to act. Meanwhile, across the city in a dark abandoned warehouse, Victor Hale stood smiling. "Everything is falling into place," he whispered beside him. The tired employee struggled, looked at him and said coldly, "You're just a message, nothing more." Back at the mansion, Daniel paced back and forth. "He wants to scare me. He wants control." Margaret watched him carefully. "No," she said, "he wants something more." Daniel stopped. "What do you mean?" Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly. "Revenge like this is not just about money, it's about breaking you." Those words hit. I remembered everything. Sophia, betrayal. Now this Victor didn't just want his business. He wanted his. Daniel's phone rang. Unknown number. The room went silent. Daniel answered slowly. "Hello," a calm, cold voice replied. "Miss me, Daniel?" Victor. Daniel's voice turned sharp. "What do you want?" Victor laughed softly. "I already told you. I want everything." Clenched his jaw. "Let that man go." Victor's tone changed slightly. "Too late for demands." Then he added, "But I'll give you a chance." Daniel's heart raced. "A deal." Victor smiled on the other end. "Tomorrow, 8 p.m. Come alone." Daniel's eyes widened. "If you want to save your employee." Victor paused. "Protect your precious mother." A deep silence. "Involve the police. Or next time the video will be of someone you love." The call stood frozen. Margaret stepped closer. "What did he say?" Daniel looked at her, his eyes filled with conflict. "He wants me to go alone." Margaret immediately said, "You're not going." Daniel shook his head. "I have to." "No," Margaret said firmly. "You don't walk into danger blindly." Daniel's voice rose slightly. "And what if he hurts someone else?" Margaret stepped closer, her voice calm but powerful. "And what if he traps you forever?" Silence. Daniel looked away. He was trapped between fear and responsibility. But then Margaret said something unexpected. "If you go," she paused, "I'm coming with you." Daniel turned instantly. "No, absolutely not." Margaret's eyes didn't move. "You said this time we face everything together." That one line left Daniel speechless because deep inside he knew she was right, but he had no idea this decision would put both their lives on the edge of death, and someone was already watching them, waiting. The clock ticked slowly. Every second felt heavier than the last. 8 p.m. The time Victor had given. Daniel stood near the door, his hands slightly trembling, but his face determined. Behind him, Margaret adjusted her shawl quietly. "I'm ready," she said calmly. Daniel turned instantly. "Please stay here." Margaret shook her head. "No." Voice was soft but unbreakable. "I didn't fight all this way to watch you walk into danger alone." Closed his eyes for a moment. This was the same woman who once cleaned his floors silently, and today she stood like his strongest shield. He took a deep breath. "Okay, but you stay behind me. Always." Margaret smiled faintly. "I was always behind you, Daniel." That one line carried years of love, pain, and sacrifice, and this time Daniel understood it completely. They stepped out together. The car drove through dark streets, silent, tense, every turn taking them closer to danger. Finally, they reached the location, an abandoned warehouse, broken windows, dim lights, a place that felt wrong. Daniel stepped out first. Margaret followed. The air was cold, heavy. "Stay close," Daniel whispered. They walked inside slowly. Each step echoed loudly, and then a voice came from the shadows. Right on time, Victor Hale stepped forward. Same cold smile, same dangerous eyes. "Welcome." Daniel clenched his fists. "Let him go." Victor laughed. "So direct, I like that." He snapped his fingers. Two men dragged the tired employee forward, weak, barely conscious. Daniel's heart tightened. "First we talk," Victor said calmly. Margaret stepped slightly forward, her eyes locked on Victor. "So this is what you've become?" Victor looked at her, curious. "And you are?" Before Daniel could speak, Margaret answered, "I'm his mother." Silence. Victor's smile widened slowly. "Oh, so the weakness has a face now." Stepped forward angrily. "You dare?" Victor raised his hand. "Relax." Then he looked at Margaret again. "You know, your son destroyed my life." Margaret didn't flinch. "No." Voice calm, steady. "He stopped you from destroying others." Victor's expression hardened instantly. "You think you know the truth." Margaret stepped closer. "I know pain, and I know the difference between greed and justice." For a moment Victor stayed silent, then he laughed again. "Interesting, but this is not a debate." Voice turned cold. "This is the end." Suddenly his men surrounded Daniel and Margaret. Daniel's heart raced. This was a trap. Victor stepped closer, his voice low, dangerous. "You had everything. And now, I'll take it piece by piece." He signaled his men and in that moment, everything went out of control because what happened next no one expected. The moment Victor gave the signal, everything changed. His men stepped forward, surrounding Daniel and Margaret from all sides. Daniel's heartbeat thundered in his chest. This was it. A trap. A deadly one. He quickly pulled Margaret slightly behind him. "Stay close, Mom," he whispered. Margaret didn't panic, didn't scream. Instead, she looked straight at Victor, calm, fearless, and that confused him. Victor narrowed his eyes. "Even now you're not afraid," Margaret spoke slowly. "A mother who has already lost her son once," she paused, "doesn't fear losing anything anymore." Silence. Those words hit harder than any weapon. Even Daniel froze for a moment because deep down, he knew she was. Suddenly one of Victor's men grabbed Daniel from behind. Another moved toward Margaret. "Stop!" Daniel shouted, but it was too late. The situation spiraled, struggled, trying to break free. "Let her go." Victor watched, enjoying every second. "This is what helplessness feels like, Daniel." Voice was cold. "The same helplessness I felt when you destroyed me," Daniel shouted angrily. "I gave you a chance, you betrayed me." Victor's face darkened. "I did what I had to, and now I'm doing it again." Suddenly one of the men pushed Margaret harshly. She stumbled, falling to the ground. "Mom!" Daniel screamed. That moment, something inside him snapped. He broke free with all his strength, pushing the man away, rushed toward Margaret. "Are you okay?" Margaret nodded slowly. But her eyes were not on him, they were on Victor, and suddenly, she did something no one expected. She stood up and walked forward straight toward Victor. Daniel panicked. "Mom, no." But she didn't stop. She stood just a few steps away from Victor. Her eyes locked onto his, and then she said something that shocked everyone. "Your mother would be ashamed of you." Silence. Victor froze for the first time. His expression changed. Not anger, not rage, something else. Pain. Margaret continued softly. "I can see it in your eyes. You're not angry at him. You're angry at your own choices." Victor's fists clenched tightly. "Enough," he shouted, but Margaret didn't stop. "You had a chance to rebuild, but you chose revenge." "Revenge?" She looked straight into his eyes. "Always destroys the one who carries it." Entire warehouse went silent. Even Victor's men looked confused. Daniel stood still, watching everything unfold, because this wasn't just a confrontation anymore. This was something deeper, a battle between hate and truth. Victor's breathing became heavier. His voice trembled slightly. "You don't know anything about me," Margaret replied calmly. "I know one thing. No mother raises her son to become this." That line hit like a final blow. Victor stepped back slowly, his confidence cracking, his anger shaking, and in that moment everything changed. But what happened next would decide whether this ends in death or redemption. The warehouse stood silent, heavy, tense, as if even the air was waiting for what would happen next. Victor stood frozen, Margaret's words still echoing in his mind. No mother raises her son to become this. The first time his eyes flickered, not with anger, but with something buried deep inside, pain. Daniel watched him carefully. This was the same man who came to destroy everything, and now he looked broken. Victor took a step back, his voice low, almost lost. "You don't understand." Margaret moved one step closer, calm, fearless. "Then make me understand." Silence. Victor clenched his fists. "I lost everything," he said slowly. "My name, my respect, my life, and when I had nothing left," his voice cracked slightly, "no one stood with me." Margaret listened quietly. "Not even my own family." Daniel's expression softened slightly. For the first time, he wasn't seeing an enemy, he was seeing a broken man. But Margaret didn't let sympathy blind her. She spoke gently, but firmly. "And what did you do after that?" Victor looked up. "I fought back." Margaret shook her head slowly. "No, you chose the wrong fight." Silence again. "You didn't rebuild your life. You decided to destroy someone else's." Those words cut deeper than anything before. Victor's breathing became heavy. "And now look at you," Margaret continued. "Standing here with anger, crime, and guilt." She paused. "Is this the life you wanted?" Victor didn't answer because deep down he knew the truth. Daniel slowly stepped forward. "You had talent, Victor. We built everything together. You could have started again." Victor laughed bitterly. "Start again? It's not that easy." Margaret replied softly. "Neither is carrying hatred forever." That line broke something inside him. Victor's eyes filled with emotion for the first time. He looked tired of anger, tired of revenge, tired of himself. Slowly he raised his hand. His men stepped back. The tension started, looked at Daniel, then at Margaret, and said quietly, "I lost myself." Silence. Margaret stepped closer. "No, you just forgot who you were." Tears rolled down Victor's eyes for the first time. He wasn't a villain, he was just a man who made wrong choices. Slowly he nodded, and then he turned to his men. "Let them go." The ropes were untied. The employee freed. Everything stopped. The war ended. Police sirens echoed in the distance. Victor didn't run, didn't resist. He stood still, Ready to face the consequences as officers took him away, he looked back one last time at Margaret and said softly, "I wish I had someone like you." Margaret smiled gently. "It's never too late to become better." Victor nodded and walked away. Days later, everything slowly returned to normal. Daniel's business recovered. Truth replaced fear, but most importantly, Daniel changed. Again, he didn't just become successful, he became wise. One evening, he sat beside Margaret and said, "Mom, I almost lost everything again." Margaret smiled softly. "But this time, you didn't lose yourself," held her hand tightly, "because you were with me." Margaret looked at him, her eyes full of love. "I was always with you, Daniel." And this time he never forgot that again. Broken final message: sometimes life gives you a second chance, not to prove your strength, but to remind you who your real strength is. Never underestimate a mother, because when the world turns against you, she becomes your greatest shield.